Welcome back. My name is Jason Kerdabny, curator in charge of the Department of Musical Instruments, and I am excited to be coming to you tonight from the Musical Instrument Galleries at the Met. As you know, the museum has recently reopened to the public, and we are taking every possible precaution to protect the health and safety of our visitors and staff, and I hope that some of you may even visit the museum in the coming days. But at the same time, due to ongoing concerns about the pandemic, we are unable to gather for concerts or other special events at this time. So, this fall, we have planned an exciting series of digital programs that we hope will take advantage of these very different virtual platforms. While putting together this season of events has been a particularly collaborative effort for all of the staff, I want to especially thank Pamela Summy for all of her work to put these creative programs together. Tonight, we feature the harpist Parker Ramsay. Some of you may have heard of his recent project recording Bach's Goldberg variations using the pedal harp. It is a fascinating project and a revelatory recording. But before we turn the program over to Parker, I wanted to say a few words about the harps in the Met's collection. The museum is home to a stunning variety of harps dating back to ancient Egypt. The collection includes instruments from traditions that span the globe. But the type of harp now used by concert harpists is called a pedal harp. Beginning in the 18th century, harp makers made pedals in order to allow players to get chromatic pitches and play in multiple keys. You can see in this diagram the layout of pedals on an early pedal harp, and on the left, the internal mechanism that was used to adjust the length of strings in order to make these pitches. Over time, more pedals have been added in order to make the harp a fully chromatic instrument. Now, one of the great things about pedal harps, at least compared to other Western instruments, is that they are usually decorated, and they often follow changes in aesthetic design. For example, here are the pillars of 4 pedal harps from the museum's collection: a neo-Gothic design from the mid-19th century, a Victorian harp from 1895, a wonderful Art Nouveau style harp made in the 1920s, and finally, an Art Deco example from the 1940s. In 2017, the museum received this beautiful Salzedo model harp as a gift. This model was designed by the legendary harpist Carlos Salzedo, along with the artist Witold Gordon, and it was introduced in 1929 at the height of the Art Deco movement. The instrument was given to the museum by Cynthia Otis, the former principal harpist of the New York City Ballet, where she played for more than 40 years. Otis was a student of Carlos Salzedo, and he picked the harp out exactly for her after she won a competition sponsored by the New York Philharmonic in 1945. That year, she made her debut as a solo harpist with the orchestra at the age of 16. She would go on to use this beautiful harp for the entirety of her career. We are very grateful to Cynthia, who made this gift after she retired from playing a few years ago, and she has designated it in honor of the museum's 150th anniversary. Tonight we have a fascinating program, but I thought we should begin by hearing a bit of the Goldbergs themselves. The following video was from Parker's recording session in the chapel at King's College in Cambridge. This is the aria from the Goldberg variations. I hope that beautiful recording has made you somewhat intrigued about this project and that you understand why it is receiving so much attention. But now it is my great pleasure to introduce Parker Ramsay. Parker is a harpsichordist, organist, and harpist who plays both Baroque and modern harp. His new album, featuring the Goldberg variations on the harp, is going to be released next week. And so tonight, we are getting a very special advance preview. While Parker is going to play a bit, he's also going to demonstrate and discuss the project and the way he approached this monumental piece. He'll show us by playing on both the harpsichord and the harp. And I know that we are in for a real treat. Enjoy.
Hello, thank you for having me here today. I especially want to thank Jason and Pam over at the Musical Instruments Collection at the Metropolitan Museum of Art here in New York City for having me talk to you all today about the Goldberg variations and my project of taking them from the harpsichord to the harp. The Goldberg variations are fantastic because they've shown time and time again they work on several different instruments. We have transcriptions for saxophones, for viola da gambas, for pianos, for single pianists, you name it. We've sort of got it. It's also worked on the harp before. There are 2 other recordings of the Goldberg variations on modern pedal harp, and other harpists have taken it under wing as well. My own journey with the Goldberg variations started as a pianist when I was in high school, and then I revisited them again as a master's degree student at Oberlin Conservatory, where I was focusing on 17th and 18th century music and instruments and how to perform them and kind of getting down to philosophy. It was there that I really started to reconsider what Bach was telling us in the aria of the Goldberg variations, because the left hand is so incredibly telling. As some of you may know, the aria melody line in the Goldberg variations never returns. It's just at the beginning and the end, and what Bach takes the other 30 movements and makes it out of is the left hand, which is just a chord progression. And if we look at it on the surface, it's just 3 notes. But Bach actually tells the harpsichordist to hold them down to create this sort of sphere of harmony underneath the really florid melody line. Adds a resonant quality to the instrument that we don't normally associate with the harpsichord. There are lots of straw men about this instrument being too short and too plucky and not terribly dynamic because, of course, when we play a note and lift up, it dies immediately. We don't have a sustaining pedal like we have on a piano, and we don't have any means of artificially making a note longer than it is without using our fingers and the ability to hold notes down. This is the very means of harpsichord technique and how we get dynamics, is by holding different notes down, playing with note lengths, and playing with how much noise is actually going on inside the sounding board after we've played notes. Now the harp has the totally opposite problem. If we play a note and come away from it, it goes on into infinity. Rings and rings and rings. Oh, by the way, I should go ahead and say that the harp is tuned slightly differently from the harpsichord. The harpsichord is at Baroque pitch, or A415, which is kind of a made-up number for where we've decided to put Baroque instruments, as we call them. Meanwhile, my harp is at standard A442. So, for some of you, it might sound like my harpsichord is playing in G flat major and my harp's playing in G major. It's not. G is just in a slightly different place. Anyway, going back to the harp, if we play the notes, they ring and ring and ring into infinity. And we can actually achieve what Bach is getting at more kaleidoscopically and even more smoothly than we could on the harpsichord because of this natural resonance. The style that Bach is writing in actually has a specific name in French. It's called the style brisé, or a broken style, where it's actually imitating a guitarist or a lutenist or a harpist strumming a chord very slowly underneath a talented singer or violinist or flutist who is showing off their stuff at court. So just sort of imagine someone in a wig, powdered face, kind of carrying on. And the harp is able to take that resonance and have it pass through the entire instrument because the other strings are ringing in sympathy. If we were to stop a note, it doesn't stop ringing through the rest of the instrument. We have to stop other strings, especially the wire strings at the bottom of the harp, which are quite thick and really, really give the harp its really kind of boomy resonance. So when we play the accompanying figure of the style brisé underneath the melody line, we're kind of, in a way, getting back at what Bach is pointing to in terms of plucked instruments. It's really quite a different sound world, but one that I think kind of really gets to the heart at what Bach is telling us. Now, another difference between the harpsichord and the harp is quite obvious visually. We have two keyboards as opposed to one set of strings. It looks like two pianos kind of set on top of each other. What it is the fact that these two keyboards control different sets of strings. One controls a longer set of strings, which is a little bit warmer. Meanwhile, the upper set is a little bit shorter and narrower. This gives a wonderful opportunity for the harpsichordist to differentiate between a melody line and an accompaniment, such as in variation 13. So if we turn over, we can see that Bach tells us to play it on two different keyboards. It says a two clave, or deux clavier, or deux clavier. For me, I think it's in it. My knowledge of the language isn't wonderful, but it's an indication that we should play them on two different keyboards. So. Now, of course, on the harp, we have the ability to play on different parts of the string, because while the harpsichord jacks, or the plucking mechanism, is confined to a single part of the string, we can choose to play anywhere from here to here to here to here, and we can get a different tone quality. So I can actually achieve the same kind of nasal tone quality while keeping that same sense of resonance we heard in the aria. Another fantastic thing about having two keyboards of the harpsichord is the ability to create these fantastic illusions in the ear, not dissimilar to Escher's drawings and paintings, where you see staircases beginning and ending, and you don't know quite where they're starting or where they're going to find their completion until you realize it's an optical illusion. Bach creates those same illusions for the ears, especially in places like Variation 8, where the hands and the arms actually cross over each other. Now, this is really a headache for pianists who try and play things where the hands are on top of each other, and it can even be difficult on the harp, where two sets of notes playing next to each other can really be quite claustrophobic, because on the harpsichord, you have the same sets of notes right next to each other, and the arms really aren't getting in the way of each other. So I'll show you. I'll change the camera angle here so you can actually see the hands a little bit better. Hey there. So if you look here, I'm actually going to play a little bit of Variation 8 so you can see where the arms cross over each other, and I can show you exactly what Bach is doing to create those little illusions. Here Bach crosses over, and the top voice here is in the left hand. It's almost completely imperceptible, but there is a change, and by the time it's changed, you don't really realize how it happened. Again. Of course, when we take this back to the harp, it can be a little bit more difficult, and it may require a little bit of recomposing, which is what I found I had to do. So I'll show you. Again, it's very different. It's perhaps not as distinct as the harpsichord, but what we can get those lovely arpeggios that sounded a little bit dry in the harpsichord. And we have them really resound and ring. And so the little harmonic changes are a little bit more smooth and not as jumpy. Again, keeping in style with the idea that a lot of these movements are meant to imitate plucked instruments. We see the same thing actually in Variation 20. I'll show you again what Bach does here at the harpsichord. So turning over the pages now to Variation 20, he actually has this wonderful variation where the two hands constantly cross over each other in these arpeggiated patterns, which to me sound really much like a harp or a lute. Of course, there are compromises on the harpsichord, because no matter how long we hold down the notes, they don't really ever get the chance to die on their own. We always have to lift them up before they're quite ready to finish sounding through the soundboard. Meanwhile, on the harp, the natural resonance again allows for those arpeggios to really keep ringing and ringing, even if our hands get a little congested. It's not as distinct, it's not as articulate as the harpsichord or as precious, but it has this wonderful roundness to the sound, which I think Bach might be pointing to. If we now look at the harpsichord, one of the most obvious things about it is that it has a chromatic scale readily available, just like on an organ or a piano, whereby all the middle notes of the scale are immediately accessible. This is not the case on the harp. The harp is not naturally a superchromatic instrument. If you look at the notes that are available on the string, I can set my pedals. In order for me to change the sharps and flats, I actually have to point down to my feet and show that there's a little pedal mechanism here. If you can see here, I have to, I'm going to move the camera here. I technically have to move my feet. I'm not sure if I'm doing a terribly good job here. Move my feet to change sharps and flats. So here's a C here. There's a C sharp, C, and there's a C flat, which is the same as the B natural next to it. Okay, I think I've done a pretty bad job of that. But anyway, I'll now change the camera angle eventually to show exactly what we're getting at with chromaticism and why it's a little bit more of a challenge on the harp than it is at the harpsichord. So back at the harpsichord here, if I am to play the famous variation 25, or the Black Pearl as it's known, which has these incredibly lush harmonies and intense, painful chromaticism, it's just a matter of plunking down the notes as Bach writes them. Back at the harp, as I've shown you, it's a little bit more difficult. So I'm actually going to play for you an entire performance of Variation 25, which I recorded last week, which Jason has gratefully allowed me to plug through the feed for you guys. So here you go. So as you can see, it's a little bit more of a workout for the feet than it would be on the harpsichord, where your feet don't really do anything. But it's also a little bit of a workout for the brain of really trying to figure out how to get all those notes to really sound pure and to sound smooth and sound expressive, like you would on the harpsichord. Another disadvantage that the harp has is because of its boominess, it doesn't necessarily have that wonderful fugal counterpoint sound that we expect from harpsichords and pianos and organs. But there are things the harp can add to counterpoint. If we look at variation 1, the left hand looks like it's in a single line. It's a wonderful polonaise, right? But if we can separate them out in terms of what's going on, there's a bass line. But it's difficult to hold it down while the other voice is playing above. And kind of make them distinct from each other because the harpsichord has a slightly monochromatic quality to it. So when we add the right hand, famous right hand ascending scale melody, so I'll try again. Can be a little hard to differentiate as to where that bass line is and where that middle voice is. On the harp, that bass line can keep sounding and support the middle voice underneath harmonically. Again, the clarity is probably not as much as it would be on a harpsichord, but we still have this sense that there are multiple voices going on, even though they're not notated to be held down. Again, the harp offers something incredibly different from the harpsichord, and by no means does the harp have the final say in how the Goldberg variations should be played, nor does the harpsichord, nor does the piano. In a lot of Bach's music, Bach played around with instrumentation. He used a lot. I recently spoke to the New York Times about how Bach used to take pieces for the lute and turn them into pieces for keyboard, or how his violin partitas turn up as organ sinfonias in his cantatas, or how he used to arrange concerti grossi by Telemann and Vivaldi and transcribe them for the organ, or how he used to take cantata movements for tenor and strings and turn them into organ arrangements for publishers. Glenn Gould once said that Bach wrote music that was sort of beyond instruments, and Donald Tovey maintained that Bach's music sort of had the implication that instruments were made for music, not that music was made for instruments. And also throughout history, we know that Bach's music works so well in translation for other instruments that it's important to see what other voices can bring to his music that we might not have heard before, especially when Bach himself was very flexible throughout his life. So to close today, I'm gonna return to one of my favorite variations, which is actually Variation 2. It's one of the simpler ones, but it's another place where the harmony and the counterpoint really play with each other, because the two voices can be very individually shaped in the right hand. Meanwhile, the left hand can take this wonderful, sumptuous, kind of sexy bass line and really just decay of its own accord. So here you go. I really want to thank you all for being with me today and for listening, and I hope you all enjoy, and I look forward to hearing your questions in the post-talk Q&A. Thank you.